All right, Kate, Roger, Suzanne, and checking in right now from the breaking news desk, because right now we are tracking a huge developing story. We have just learned some brand new information tied to the indictment of former President Donald Trump. Again, many of these details surfacing while most of us were sleeping. We now know that the charges against Trump include violations under the Espionage Act. The investigation, of course, stems from the hundreds of classified documents that were found at Trump's estate in Florida. Trump is now the first former president to face federal charges. The case against him in Manhattan, of course, only involves New York State. Now, if he's actually convicted, there's a possibility that Trump could face time in prison. This morning, Trump and his attorneys, though, continue to declare his innocence, calling the entire investigation a witch hunt.
Look, he knows he's innocent. He knows this is garbage. He knows there's fundamental flaws with each one of the counts that they're apparently putting in this indictment. And he knows that the whole process, starting from the archivist, was a corrupt and politicized one.
Now, Trump is expected to appear in court in Florida on Tuesday for his arraignment. We'll have those details, of course, as they surface. Live from the breaking news desk, I'm Roger, Suzanne, and Wendell, Nicole.
Roger, thank you.